Man, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. First of all, it's really a pleasure to have you on Syriana Analysis. Recently, you published an article titled Syrian Refugees in Turkey From Opportunity to Achilles Heel. I think this topic is very important, especially for those who follow the Middle Eastern affairs and also the European affairs, because these two regions were hit heavily, I would say, by the refugee crisis, especially from Syria. Now, some countries perceive the Syrian refugees as opportunity, right? Such as the case of Turkey under Erdogan. But before we address this issue, I would like to know your opinion on a particular issue. Has Erdogan encouraged Syrians to become refugees in his country at the first place, starting from 2011 after the war in on Syria, or was he faced with a dilemma that tens of thousands of refugees are running for their lives? Hence, it was the only ethical thing to do, which is accepting them.
Let me back to 2011 when the Syrian war started. Even before the war started, Turkey started to establish some refugee camps along the border, along the Syrian border. So when we saw this happening, we think that, okay, there is something gonna happen in Syria, like blaming a civil war, strifing some sectarian clashes or something like that, because we know that the Syrian mercenaries, both foreigner or Syrian one, used the Turkish border to wage attacks against the Syrian government forces. So it was possible when we saw that Turkey, along with the other Western nations and the other Gulf states, were trying to ignite some clashes inside Syria. So yes, when Turkish government back in 2011, we saw clearly we could grasp that Turkey used some so-called Syrian refugees to wage an armed incursion against Bashar al-Assad and his government. So when the opposition parties back then, 2011 and 2012, the opposition politicians did not even see those camps. The government and the law enforcement of Turkey tried to prevent what was going on these so-called refugee camps. So at first, when the war started, or even before it started, we knew that those free Syrian officers, free Syrian army members, disguised as Syrian refugees in Turkey, and it's against the international law, because if something happened, the war waged in your neighbor country and refugees came, you have to demilitarize those refugee camps. But what we saw along the Syrian border after start of the war, there were lots of armed elements in those camps. So at first, the Syrian refugee problem for Turkey was started as armed militia issue against Syria.
I think what you mentioned is here very important, because I've been following a an interview in 2012, I think, and the person who was being interviewed is Ghassan Ben Jiddo. And Ghassan Ben Jiddo was a senior Al Jazeera journalist, and then he resigned from Al Jazeera and he formed or established what is known today Al Mayadeen TV. And back then, he said clearly that the refugee camps were being established before the war. And as someone who followed this, of course, I took that statement into consideration, but because I didn't have evidence myself, and then I followed the reaction, I would say, of the mainstream journalists who were ridiculing these claims, and they say this is just a conspiracy theory, right? But you are confirming this story, because it's very important to know the origins of the crisis. Because here in Europe, for example, when you want to discuss the refugee crisis, you have to discuss the root causes of the refugee crisis. I am 100% for helping the refugees, accepting them. I'm one of the refugees who was grateful in Germany to be protected, right? But if we don't address the root cause of the refugees and just say, let's protect the refugees, we are just running in an empty circle, because in my opinion, the best solution is to first prevent a refugee crisis. And if it is, I would say, out of hands, then of course you need to help the refugees, but not to create a refugee crisis from the first place. This is my point of view. And unfortunately, it's very taboo. It was, I would say, in 2016 to speak about this issue. And I myself, I was called a fascist and a neo-Nazi for pointing this very simple argument, which is why this refugee crisis happened. But in the case of Turkey, and in general, I mean, I think in politics, language matters, right? Because it gives us context and shows intentions. Now, in the Syrian refugee case in Turkey, Erdogan's government used the terms guests and Ansar to describe the refugees. What do these terms at the beginning mean in political literature, and why Erdogan adopted them?
There are two reasons for that. The first is Erdogan and generally the ruling government party AKP's Islamic ideology, because they present the refugee question, especially Syrian, Afghan, or the other Muslim countries. When refugees came to Turkey, they claim that this is our Islamic duty to host those brothers and sisters. So it's a kind of, you know, Islamic solidarity. They present it as an Islamic solidarity and presenting Turkey as the leader of Ummet, the Islamic nation. And this is, you know, intertwined with Erdogan's transformation of domestic politics in Turkey. Because, as I mentioned in my article, Turkey during the Republican era, after the Republican era maybe, the Kemalist ideology was a secular nation-state ideology, and it was also preventing Turkey to intervene the Eastern nations' domestic politics. But when the AKP started to govern Turkey, they transformed this ideology into a kind of Muslim Brotherhood ideology, a transnational ideology for their political issues. So the first one is that AKP and Erdogan are trying to present themselves as the leader of Ummah, the Islamic nation. But the other reason was that Turkey has been using those refugees as guests, because if Turkey give them the international protection status of refugees, the strict sense of refugee, they need to provide some other basic provisions for the refugees. But they use an ambiguous term for refugees, so we don't know how use them. Are they in protection for international law, or are they protected by the domestic law of Turkey? We don't know. This is an ambiguous term to use whenever they want to use for the refugees. I think there are two reasons why they, labeled the refugees as Ansar or guests. They can avoid the international law with this ambiguous term.
So they could circumvent, I would say, the Geneva Convention by calling them Ansar or guests. So they don't give them status, legally they would be
Yeah.
obliged to protect them and provide them with certain
Also, also
necessities.
Turkey has a, how can I say, a, endorsement of Geneva Convention. What I mean is that Turkey accepted the Western people as refugees according with the Geneva Convention, but when they come from eastern part of eastern border of Turkey, they do not give them refugee status.
Wow, that's very interesting. In the article, you also mentioned that Erdogan used the refugees as a weapon, or in other words, wanted cheap labor in Turkey. If that is the case, what has changed recently? I mean, in between 2011 and I would say till 20 maybe 17 or 16, it was an era where when Erdogan and his government were encouraging refugees to come, and now the mood is shifting and the sentiments are more negative towards the refugees from state media and the journalists and the activists. Why is this policy change against the refugees now?
First, Turkish economic crisis. Those Turkish people has feeling this economic depression for at least 4 years, and the easy one to blame the refugee people, because Turkey allocated lots of money to Syrian refugees, and we saw lots of videos, and many of them are not corroborated, but people started to believe that the eastern border of Turkey is not well protected, and people started to believe that the government, the AKP government, has consciously opening the eastern border of Turkey, and this is a blatant violation of national security. And the other one, no, the first one is Turkish people has feeling the burning issue like unemployment, the inflation, and etc. So people blame the AKP government and its refugee policy, because when refugees come to not Turkey, name it and other countries, they are used for cheap labor. They pressing the salaries downwards. So people blame that the refugees as they are taking our jobs. They are the reason why our salaries decrease, so on and so on. So this is one of the reasons why Turkish people and some state politicians, some journalists started to heat up these refugee issue against Erdogan and AKP.
I think the sentiments are also similar in Lebanon. I lived there for 5 years, and lots of people say that the Syrian refugees have taken their jobs. And this is a question, I think it's similar to who came first, the eggs or the chicken, because when the refugees arrived, I would say, who accepted to work for less? Are the Syrian refugees accepted to work for less salary, or the landlords or the job owners were offering them jobs with cheaper, I would say, less salaries? I myself worked, I would say, in Lebanon for the minimum and the minimum wage that no one would accept as a Lebanese to work, because I had to survive, right? And so it's different case. comparing to the nationals or those who live in that country. But when these sentiments have changed towards the refugees, Turkey launched at least 4 military operations inside Syria to create the so-called safe zones. And according to the Turkish government, these are meant to resettle the refugees in these zones. Now, do you agree with the Syrian perspective or the narrative that these zones are meant to impose certain demographic changes in these areas and then Turkify them and occupy these areas permanently?
Mm-hmm. There are rumors about that. There have been rumors about that because we know Turkish behaviors from the Northern Cyprus issue and some opposition parties, as I mentioned in my article, like the main opposition party, Republicans People Party, provide a plan for Northern Syria, like Northern Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
It's like not formally Turkey annexing the northern part of Syria, but like Northern Cyprus, the so-called an independent entity, independent state created, but it is Turkish dominance. It is within the Turkish dominance. So yeah, there are some rumors about Turkish army and Turkish government want to establish permanent posts in northern Syria. And when we look at the not governing coalition of Turkey, the opposition coalition of Turkey even does not mention like we are going to pull our troops back to Turkey from Syria, because the AKP legitimized their military operations inside Syria. Like, okay, if you say that we have a refugee question in Turkey, then we're gonna settle them inside the safe zones in northern Syria. So you have to support us during these military operations. So yes, the opposition parties supported the AKP government during these military operations inside Syria. And I don't think, or I don't see any clue about any of the parties in Turkey is thinking about the pullback of Turkish troops from Syria. So yeah, even I think annexation will be on the table.
So if we follow these zones, for example, we are talking about Afrin, Jarablos, Ain al-Arab, or Kobani, etc. And in these areas, we can see a few things. One, Turkey is building schools in these areas, and the curriculum is Turkish. Any, I would say, newborn person in that area who would like he or she will integrate in that environment, right? And they will learn Turkish. They're using the Turkish currency, the Turkish curriculum. So I would say this could be the neo-Ottoman Turkification, because during the Ottoman era, we know that some Turkification process happened for the Arabic-speaking people in Syria and elsewhere, and it is, I think, dangerous because the people who will be sent from Turkey to these areas, they are not originally from that areas. They could be from the suburbs of Damascus. They could be from the suburbs of Aleppo. They could be from any area, from Deir ez-Zor, and they will be settled there. And so with the process of Turkification, I do not rule out the possibility of calling for a referendum, that the people either want to be independent, or they, as you mentioned, in the Northern Cyprus style solution, or even joining Turkey. And I think this scenario is on the table in regards of Syria. And Syria as a government, as an army, they don't have the means to counter this, right? I mean, they're economically weak. Militarily, of course, they're not gonna wage a war against Turkey. It's a NATO country. It's like Assad is not Zelensky, right? He doesn't provoke a bigger bear to come to his home like Zelensky did. So I think the bet from the Syrian side is wait and see what's going to happen in Ukraine with the hope that Russia would come out victorious or more powerful, and then they could lobby on Turkey and also on the American forces. But beside this, I don't see the Syrian side is capable of pushing the Turkish side outside of Syria.
Yeah, you are right. Beside this, the northern Syria part, Turkish governors, deputy governors ruling those areas, Hatay, Kilis, Urfa, Gaziantep, those provinces, deputy governors are ruling now the northern part of Syria. So Turkish governmental institutes established in northern Syria, like posting institution of Turkey, like agricultural institution of Turkey, and also Turkey started to sell or export those areas crops. So it does not look good for Syrian government, and like you said, Syrian government sees Turkey as an occupier, but it is up to Russia to take action against Turkey.
You mentioned the opposition. This is my last question to you. Correct me if I'm wrong, the elections are next year, right? In 2023.
Yeah,
and
if not a snap election.
Yeah, so it's scheduled, I would say. So whether the opposition coalition won or not, or AKP won or not, it's not going to make a change in the northern Syria. The Turkish army would be there, and they have a support of both the opposition and the current governing parties, right?
Yeah, I think so, because as I said, there is no a schedule, declared schedule about pulling back the Turkish troops inside Syria. Every party in Turkey, even the AKP, because it signed the Astana memorandum with Russia and Turkey, and it declared that we are supporting the Syrian sovereignty and national unity. But if you support this, you have to, create a schedule for what the Turkish troops gonna do in Syria. Turkish government, Turkish opposition parties legitimize the operations with regard to the PKK and Daesh, especially. But we know in Idlib, even Turkish troops inside Idlib, but in Idlib there is no PKK, or in Idlib formally there is no Daesh in Idlib, but Turkish government still inside the Idlib or northern Aleppo. What I can say about this is that Turkey has negotiating with the United States, and it has used these areas to where it controls to negotiate with the United States and to use the tool of pressuring Bashar al-Assad, because Aleppo is very important for Syrian economy, for Syrian culture, Syrian national unity. So Turkey, I think, is not gonna give up those areas for the time being.
Yeah, I agree. I think even if the Syrian government liberated technically the city of Aleppo, the suburbs are still occupied, and it's the geopolitical importance of Aleppo is not only the city, it's this connection between the city and the suburbs and Turkey, and from Turkey all the way to Damascus. So I think Turkey succeeded in this to deprive Syria from one of its strengths. And I'm very grateful, Erman, to have you on Syriana Analysis. It's really a pleasure. Guys, I put the link, the Twitter link of Erman in the description below. Please go and follow him and his work. He's also posting articles in different parts of the world, including also Ukraine. So give a support also to Erman. Erman, it was really a pleasure. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I've been your host, Kevork Almasyan of Syriana Analysis. If you like my reporting, please subscribe and hit the like button, as it really helps me with the algorithm of YouTube. And if you want to support my work, please become a patron. Link in the description below, and see you next time.